Chapter 13. Barbara Lamont continued to sit at the table where she had been humiliated, her fists clenched. What she would have liked to do when Shalimar was under the table looking at her legs was put her foot squarely in his face. It had been so close to her, she had felt his hot breath on her shins. With all the alcohol that was in that blast, it was a wonder he hadn't melted her nylons. What a shame that the delightful thought of kicking him had come to her only now, when it was obviously too late. Well, maybe there was truth in the adage, heaven will protect the working girl. If she'd kicked him, he really might have been able to fire her. Here was Mr. Bossart coming back, alone. He reminded her of a clothing store dummy, or one of those models who pose in the men's fashion section of a magazine. He sat down beside her and folded his hands like a deacon, looking down at his square, antiseptically manicured thumbs. He cleared his throat. There's always an incident or two at even the best-run office party, Mr. Bossart began. He looked at her and smiled winningly. You seem like a very poised, sensible girl. I know you'll take it for what it was worth and let the office gossip die down as quickly as possible by not adding to what is said after tonight. I never gossip, Barbara said coldly. Despite her control, tears came into her eyes. There was nothing like being called a bitch to make a girl fall to pieces. It had always been that way with her, and little bitch was somehow even worse. I'm sure tomorrow Mr. Shalimar won't even remember any of this, Mr. Bossart said. If and when he does remember, it will upset him very much. And we mustn't let it do that, Barbara thought. She said nothing. Mr. Bossart smiled again. You'll forgive him, won't you? Why are you sticking up for him? She asked curiously. I like him. Oh. Now, don't say oh like that, Barbara. I think you're a lovely, refined girl. I like you, too. I wouldn't be going to all this trouble apologizing for him, trying to make amends, if I thought you were just like some of the other little typists who think an incident like this is worth a week or two of coffee break jokes. Excuse me, Caroline Bender said. She stood up. I have to meet someone. Good night. Good night, Mr. Bossart said. Caroline picked up her purse and mouthed a kiss at Barbara. Then she made a fist over the back of Mr. Bossart's head and made a face of mock fury which turned into a grin. Barbara couldn't help grinning back as Caroline slipped away. Good, Mr. Bossart said, noticing her expression. You're forgetting about it already. Barbara didn't answer. We'll go somewhere and have a drink and forget about it. So he was asking her out. Evidently, he had asked Caroline first because he had been with her all evening, and she had said no because she had another appointment. Now, in the guise of atonement, he was making her second fiddle. Did she want to go with him? Why not? Mr. Bossart was too much of a stuffed shirt to try to pull a Shalimar, even a minor variation, and she certainly didn't want to stay here any longer. People at the other tables were still looking at her, waiting to see what would happen next. All right, Barbara said pleasantly. While Mr. Bossart was getting her coat, Barbara leaned tiredly against the checkroom counter. What a disappointment this party had been. She hadn't met a soul, and Mr. Shalimar, whose reputation and reminiscences had intrigued her, had turned out to be a garter snapper of the worst order. A mental picture of him, running along a line of girls and snapping their garters as fast as his fingers could move, like one of those trick camera stills of recorded motion, arose in her mind, and she laughed to herself. Now, you look like a different girl. Mr. Bossart was holding her coat for her to put on. She slipped her arms into the sleeves. He wasn't so bad. He was trying hard. After all, he would sacrifice an assistant for an editor-in-chief any day, but he didn't want to sacrifice either. She had a good job, she'd gotten her promotion, and the raise that went with it, so she'd be a good sport. Mr. Bossart would remember this the next time she asked for a raise, which would be soon. He took her to a small, dim, fairly expensive bar on a side street off Madison Avenue. Barbara recognized it instantly as the type of bar she and her friends referred to as a married man's bar, which meant no one who knew him or his wife would be apt to know about it, and if they did come there, it was too dark to see anyone else anyway. "I often come here when I stay late in town," Mr. Bossart said. "It's very pleasant." "Yes," Barbara said. She leaned back against the leather banquette and sipped her drink. There were 3 Hawaiian musicians roaming the room, stopping at each table to play Hawaiian songs on the strange instruments that always sounded to her like the tropical surf at midnight. If there were music coming off the moon, she thought, it would sound like that. "Hey, Sydney," Mr. Bossart called softly, leaning forward. Barbara looked up. The man who had passed their table to go to the bar stopped and looked back. "Hey, Art," he smiled, the most arresting smile Barbara had ever seen. It was the kind of smile that made you forget completely what the rest of his face was like. It had in it so much sweetness and genuine pleasure and deviltry all combined. Not that the rest of his features were bad. They were quite likable, in fact, and very young for a man whose hair was completely silver gray. He did not look older than 40. "All alone?" said Mr. Bossart. "Yes. Thought I'd stop in for 1 or 2 before I made the train." He looked at Barbara and started to go back to the bar. "Sit down with us," Mr. Bossart said, already moving aside. "All right." He sat down next to Barbara and gave her a modified version of that smile, which was still enough to make her sit up straight. "Barbara Lamont, Sydney Carter," Mr. Bossart said. "I'm very glad to meet you." "How do you do?" Barbara said softly. "We've just been at the annual Fabian blowout," Mr. Bossart said, as if he wanted to reassure Sydney Carter that Barbara wasn't one of his regular dates. "Oh? How was it?" "Very fine," Mr. Bossart said. "Very fine." "Lovely," Barbara said, without much enthusiasm. "We aren't having a party this year," said Sydney Carter. "I discovered that everyone on my staff was looking forward to it with the same dread that I was, so I gave them all bigger bonuses instead and called it a day. We're lucky in that we all get along with one another very well, but in some companies, I don't see how they get through the merry Yule without a fist fight or 2. Barbara laughed. "What do you do at Fabian?" Sydney Carter asked her. "Besides have fistfights." "Yes. I'm assistant beauty editor on America's Woman, as of yesterday, actually." "Now you can tell her about Wonderful," Mr. Bossart said. "Wonderful perfume. Do you make it?" "Oh, no, we try to sell it," Sydney Carter said. "It's one of our accounts." "The Sydney Carter Agency," Barbara said. "Of course. I remember now." Sydney pretended to sniff at her neck. "You don't wear it." "I have a surprise for you," Barbara said. She opened her purse, and there, as she had remembered it was the flacon of Wonderful she carried when she went on dates. There were only a few drops left at the bottom. "Look, I have some right with me." "Well, would you believe it?" Sydney cried. "You're almost out, too. I'll send you a 2-ounce bottle next week." "Thank you. It's a good thing," Sydney said, "that I didn't mention our golf club account. She'd probably have a set of those hidden in her coat sleeve." The strolling Hawaiians stopped in front of their table and began to play the Hawaiian war chant, loudly and with enthusiasm. For some reason, it put Barbara in a very good mood again. She found herself humming along with it and tapping on the table edge with her fingers. Sydney looked at her and slipped the leader a folded bill. "Play the beer commercial," he said. The leader grinned. The Hawaiians glanced at one another with unconcealed delight and began the funniest song Barbara had ever heard. It was "Peels is the beer for me, boys, Peels is the beer for me," played in a jazzed-up Hawaiian rhythm and accompanied by the Hawaiians singing the words at the top of their voices in Hawaiian. "Play it again," she said when they had finished. "Please." Sydney nodded at the musicians. Well, just once more, the leader said reluctantly, and then they went through the whole thing again. I could listen to that all night, Barbara said when they had finished and gone to the next table. Well, I couldn't, said Mr. Bossart, shuddering in mock horror. He stood up and went off to the men's room. Left alone with Sydney Carter, Barbara couldn't think of anything to say. She bit her lip. All the things she would ordinarily say to a date or a boy her age she couldn't say to this man, because he obviously was married and an executive and probably should have caught a commuter train that left 2 hours ago. Anything polite and forced she would ordinarily say to a business acquaintance she couldn't say either, because Sydney Carter had a glint in his eye and a contagious smile, and he had changed her evening in 10 minutes from a thing of hopelessness to something delightful. I might run an ad for Wonderful in America's Woman, he said. Do you think that would be a good idea? Of course. No, seriously, don't just say yes because you work there and you're out with one of the vice presidents. I want to know what you think as an editor and a woman. She was so self-conscious she knew she was saying the wrong thing, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. I'm not out with Mr. Bossart the way you think I am, and I'm not an editor. I'm just an assistant editor, and I'm not really even a woman. I'm 21. Then answer me according to all those things. She paused. Frankly, I think Wonderful is too expensive for our readers. They're mostly young housewives who don't get a chance to shop in big department stores. They buy everything at the supermarket or the shopping center, and they have to drag their babies along when they do shop because they only have part-time help, if at all. They buy cologne in the drugstore, and for special occasions, like Christmas or a birthday, their husbands sometimes buy perfume for them, but more often a big appliance like a washing machine, which they need a lot more. Sydney Carter nodded. But you use Wonderful. Then tell me what you're like. She paused again. How much could she tell him? Obviously, he wanted to know how much she was typical, not atypical. I'm a working girl, Barbara said finally. This is my first job. I went to college for a while and never finished, and then I took a secretarial course, and I found my job through an employment agency. I don't make very much money, but how I look is important to me, partly because of vanity and morale, and partly because of the kind of work I'm in. I'd spend practically my last cent on cosmetics and perfume if nobody gave them to me for presents. I don't see any point in buying cheap perfume because I have to smell it too. Did you get that little bottle of Wonderful for a present? Number I bought it for myself. She smiled. That's why it's so little. He put his elbow on the table, leaned his chin on his fist, and looked at her for a while. What kinds of presents do you get from the boys who take you out? I get them, Barbara said. She didn't realize how bitter her tone sounded until the words were already out, and it was too late. Sydney smiled, but this time it wasn't that devastating smile. It was totally different, full of understanding and a little sad. Haven't you met anybody you liked? He asked gently. Suddenly, she wanted to pour everything out to him. A stranger. She turned her head away. There was Mr. Bossart standing at the very end of the bar, she noticed with desperation, with his arm around a big, beefy man. He looked as if he were settled for the next half hour. Oh, I hate this Sydney Carter, she thought. Why is he so kind? He's making me feel sorry for myself. Not yet, she answered lightly. You ought to be married, he said. I can tell. I was married. Divorced? There was so much compassion in his tone that in that instant, the entire last scene with Mac came back as if it had happened that very evening. And not only that evening, but every single evening, relentlessly, since he had left her. Yes, she said. And you live alone? I have a daughter, she said. Oh. She could see it on his face then, what he was thinking. This poor girl, so young. No wonder she never has enough money. How lonely she must be, and how frightened of the future. Doesn't anyone take care of you? Your parents? I take care of my mother, and she takes care of the baby. My father died when I was 9. My ex-husband sends us a little money, of course. You'll find someone who'll take care of you, he said. From anyone else, she would have mistrusted that statement. It would have aroused all her protective instincts, real and imaginary, and she would have thought, why, the old sugar daddy? But Sydney's tone was so obviously impersonal and yet so obviously concerned with her needs that she knew he was envisioning a nice young bachelor, and the contrast between his opinion of what she deserved and what she was actually receiving broke down the last of the wall of reserve she had carefully kept around her since she had come back to New York. "Oh, no, I won't," she said, in a quiet voice that was just on the edge of tears. "You should have someone to care for you," he said. "What's the matter with all these boys? They're just getting started in their careers, the same as I am. If they have any children in the next few years, they want them to be their own babies." He shook his head slowly, looking at her with eyes that were troubled. "I think all the time," Barbara said. "What about my baby? She's here. She has a right to be happy, to have a home and a father. What am I supposed to do? Forget she exists? I was at the office party tonight and there was an old bastard moving in on me, making passes. He was a very important man in the company, and I knew I couldn't make a scene in front of other people." She caught Sydney's surprised look and added quickly, "Oh no, it wasn't Mr. Bossart. It was someone else, I won't say who. The whole time he was pawing my leg and trying to kiss me and making me sick to my stomach, one thought kept running through my mind. What will happen to my daughter if I lose my job? I realize now it was panic, that I could quit tomorrow and tell my new boss exactly why, or threaten to and keep the job I have. But at the time I wasn't rational. I just kept thinking about my baby." Her voice broke then, and she knew that tears were running out of her eyes, but she couldn't hold herself back any longer. And for some reason, in front of Sydney, she didn't feel like a fool at all. "I'm just like a man," Barbara went on. "I have to work like a man, fight for my job like a man, think like a man. I don't want to be a man, I want to be a woman, and I know damn well I'm not a woman at all, even at my better moments. I'm just a young girl with so many responsibilities, it throws me into a state of shock." Sydney took his handkerchief out of his breast pocket and unfolded it for her. She wiped her eyes, trying to smile at him, and saw that her mascara had left black streaks on his handkerchief. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm glad it's finally being used," he said. "It's just a decoration up there. You've been very kind. I guess you weren't expecting Niagara Falls. It doesn't really go with the Hawaiians, does it?" "They're fun, aren't they?" he agreed. "I'm glad I met you," Barbara said sincerely. "I don't see why. You've spent most of the time feeling miserable." He smiled at her then, the having fun smile. "It was a relief. It must have been a crashing bore for you, though. Don't be silly." "It's just that I've had a tough evening," Barbara said apologetically. "I'm not usually like this, and I'm probably a little high, too." "Barbara." "What?" "Don't go off into your shell again. When I first met you this evening, I couldn't quite figure you out. You look so young, but there's something withdrawn about you. Not natural shyness, but a kind of bitterness. Now, of course, I realize why. But I didn't like you that way, and I like you this way. You don't have to be like a man, as you put it." "I don't know what way to be anymore," Barbara said. "So you met a few insensitive boys who couldn't realize your needs. It won't always be like that." "I know," Barbara said, "but I only know it in my head." "Whenever you're miserable," Sydney said, "it seems as though you've always been unhappy, and you remember all the bad and disappointing things that ever happened to you. And when things are going wonderfully well, it suddenly seems as though life had never really been so bad. How do you know? He laughed. Why? Do you think the blues are the exclusive property of the young? She couldn't help laughing with him. Glad to see you two are having a good time, Mr. Bossart said, looming over them, his tweedy outline a little fuzzy in the dim room. He eased himself into his place beside Barbara. Did I miss anything? About 4,000 drinks, said Sydney. Then I beat you at the bar. You know who I just ran into? Old George, the best poker player the New Haven Railroad ever had on board. He doesn't look like he'll play much of a game tonight, Sydney said, glancing at the beefy man dropping over the bar. Well, are we about ready to leave? Yes, Barbara said softly, reluctantly. As the three of them went to the door, Mr. Bossart looked back and held up one hand in the direction of his friend at the bar. They nodded at each other and waved. The air was cold when Barbara reached the street, the night black and clear, with the deceptive, frosty atmosphere that makes you think you are somewhere in the country instead of breathing city fumes. A cab came cruising up the side street, its light on top looking like a Christmas ornament. Mr. Bossart opened the taxi door. You can have the first taxi, Barbara, he said. He patted her shoulder. Get home safe now, and good night, and Merry Christmas. She didn't get into the cab but turned and looked at him. Barbara and I might as well share a cab, Sydney said casually. We're both going in the same direction. Aren't you going to the train? Mr. Bossart asked. An account of ours is having an open house. I might as well show up for a few minutes and then take the milk train, as long as it's this late already. He'll be hurt if I don't show. Good night, Sid. Mr. Bossart put one arm around Sydney Carter's shoulders and with the other hand pumped his hand. Take care. You too. Good night, Mr. Bossart, Barbara said. Sydney helped her into the taxi, and it drove off. She glanced back through the rear window and saw Mr. Bossart going back into the bar. She gave the driver her address in a taut voice and turned to Sydney. How far are you going? She asked. I'm just going to drop you off and then go to the train. I couldn't let our middle-aged Boy Scout send you off by yourself at this hour of the morning. There is no party? Not that I know of. You're so nice, Barbara said. You know, Mr. Bossart means absolutely nothing to me, you know that. And yet, when I looked back just now and realized that he was just trying to get rid of me so he could go back to his poker-playing friend, I felt sort of odd. I had this thought that all over New York City right now, this minute, there are people trying to get rid of other people because they're bored with them, and somehow it depressed me. But the people who have been gotten rid of are probably relieved to be free again. Haven't you thought of that aspect of it? Barbara thought for a moment. You're absolutely right. That's just how I feel. Sydney put his hand on the seat beside hers and then picked her hand up in his. May I? Yes. She hadn't expected her heart to turn over the way it did when he took hold of her hand. It was half fright and half what she suddenly realized was excitement and desire. She held her fingers stiffly in his, and when he pressed them, she did not respond. This isn't a pass, he said quietly. It's just a braille the sighted have worked out for things they've realized they can't see. She looked straight ahead, reading the driver's number on the little card posted in front of them, reading his name, and not remembering it one instant after she had read it. All the time, she was acutely aware of Sydney's hand attached to hers, even though he was holding it lightly, and she felt as if her entire arm had turned into a heavy tree trunk. Then he let go, and her arm came to life again, and her hand, alone and deserted on the leather seat, felt cold. Here's my house, she said, wishing it weren't. He paid the driver and walked to the door. He paused on the top step. Will you be all right? Yes. Thank you. He looked up at the windows of her apartment house. Which windows are yours? Can we see them from here? Barbara pointed, feeling rather warmed. Yes. See that one with the Christmas tree? The tree lights are on. That's nice to come home to. My mother stays up late watching television. Sidney looked up at the lights for a moment longer. Then he looked down at her, very seriously. If I telephoned you and asked you to have dinner with me some night, would you? Her voice sounded strange, not her own voice at all, but something without breath. You're married, aren't you? Yes. She had known, of course, the minute he said he had to make the train, the minute she saw he was over 35, but all the same, having him tell her outright, irrevocably, came as a shock. She tried to think of something to say quickly to hide her disappointment. How many children do you have? One son, 12 years old. Oh, he was waiting, looking at her with a guarded look on his face. Barbara looked fixedly at the knot of his necktie. Don't call me, she said. I don't mean that nastily. I just mean, please don't. That's why I asked, Sidney said quietly. I like you, she said. I like you. I've had a happier, more comfortable time tonight than I've had in... I can't remember how long. You know all about me. You know who I am. I'm Barbara Lamont, the girl who wants to get married again. I can't just think about myself. So, please don't call me. All right, he said gently. He stood there smiling as she fitted her key into the lock and swung the door open. She paused for a moment, looking at him before she went in. Good night. Good night, Barbara. He took a breath, as if he wanted to say something else, but then he said nothing and turned and walked down the stairs. She went quickly into her house and shut the door before she would have to hear the sound of his footsteps dying away. When you live in a walk-up, it's like living in a village. Every landing and every apartment has its own sounds and smells. The elevator, which had worked sporadically, had finally been abandoned. As Barbara walked the stairs to her own apartment, those signs of private lives all came to her, one by one, familiar and yet each with their own secrets. The Goldsteins on the second floor, who had the biggest grocery order and always cooked chicken very early on Friday evening. The Keens, third floor rear, who had 8 children and left their apartment door unlatched all day so that the neighborhood kids could run in and out. The newlyweds down the hall who walked their gray French poodle every evening with the same air of self-conscious pride, as if it were their first child. The 2 middle-aged fairies in their 1.5-room apartment, their door closed against the world. Everyone had a family of sorts, even they. Everyone had someone to come home to be with when it was time for doors to be closed, and the rest of the world had divided off. She had a family too, but it wasn't the kind she wanted. There are all kinds of love, Barbara was thinking. Love for a parent, love for a child, love for a friend, but none of them is a substitute for any of the others. None of them is the same in any way as love for a man who loves you too. She was alone, a small figure in an empty hall, surrounded by closed doors that contained people who loved one another. As she walked, the stairs seemed like a treadmill. She remembered what Sidney had said, that when things have been going badly, it seems as though they have always been that way. What else could she possibly have told him but not to call? He was married. He was living with his wife. He had no right to want to see another girl. She would have been a fool to tell him she would see him again. He knows my address, she thought. Maybe he'll call anyway. Barbara paused on her own landing, hesitating before going down the hall to her apartment, waiting for one last moment alone with the emotion that made her so confused she could hardly think. He's married, she thought. He's married, and he's the one man I've met whom I could love. Could love? I think I love him already. You only live once. All these things have happened in my life, and I haven't lived at all. How long can I go on like this? Resentful, frightened, alone. Oh, phone me, Sidney. Please, please phone me. He won't call. I told him not to, so he won't. He's old enough to take no for an answer, and it's a good thing for me that he won't call. How could I say no again? How could I keep away from him? Does a 2-month-old baby run away from home? He'll never call me, Barbara thought, so I can think what I want about him. It's perfectly safe to have fantasies. I love him. It's just a crush, but I feel it. I feel something. I feel alive. I want to talk to him and look at him and have him hold my hand again, and even she knew what happened to girls who fell in love with married men. The men stayed married, and the girls turned down their suitors until they had lost them all. Oh, occasionally men divorced their wives to marry younger girls, but these were caricatures. The rich, foolish businessman and the peroxided chippy. It hadn't happened to anyone Barbara had ever known. Her own boss, an attractive woman who was 40 years old and looked 30, had never married. Once, when she and Barbara had had lunch together preceded by a martini, her boss had said, for no reason, "Don't ever fall in love with a married man." Now, Barbara knew it had been for a reason after all. It was the reason why a woman who was so well-groomed and charming was still alone. What good was a love affair that ended with the last train to the country, and Christmas presents that had to be given the day before Christmas because holidays were family times, and knowing that you would still be as alone as before because you could never telephone the man you loved when you needed him. She knew about affairs with married men. She was no fool. Sidney Carter was probably on the train now, and soon he would be walking up a path to the doorway of his house in the country. He would let himself into the house with his key. He would be home. No matter how bored he was, if he was bored, he would not be lonely. He would go to bed with his wife and forget Barbara. He might want Barbara, but he didn't need her. He won't ever call me, Barbara thought. But, oh God, maybe he will. And if he does, I'm going to be a damn fool, and I don't care.